Right, looks like we're ready to go. Welcome everyone, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. We're in for an exciting one today, an eye-opening session which aims to provide you with real-world insight into the cyber threat landscape in 2026. Today's session is brought to you in partnership with one of our most valued and exciting technology partners, Arctic Wolf. And by way of introduction, I'm Gavin Lee. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Concord Technology Group. I'm joined by Hannah Hammond, Concord's Group Marketing Manager. And also as well, we're joined by Michael Armstrong from Arctic Wolf. Michael brings a wealth of experience in the cybersecurity space, and he'll be delivering today's webinar. But before I hand over to Michael, there's always an opportunity within these kind of sessions to do a bit of a sales plug. So forgive me before we get into the good stuff. I just wanted to reiterate that Concord is a leader in the cybersecurity space. We've been helping our clients reduce cyber-related risk for over 20 years. We bring experience, expertise, and are trusted by over 400 valued customers. 2025 marked our 40th year in business, and as you can all appreciate, a lot changes in 40 years. But one of the things that's been a consistent within Concord is our commitment to service and putting service at the heart of everything we do. Our commitment to you guys is to align with your business goals, provide value and choice in our managed or co-managed services, whilst providing industry-leading standards of service. So like Arctic Wolf, we share a common goal, and that goal is to end cyber risk. And we aim to help support you and your colleagues in creating a safer working environment. Since our partnership almost 5 years ago, Concord and Arctic Wolf have shared many success stories. And this is with clients ranging from local manufacturers through to multinational corporations. And this is all built on the same principle of reducing cyber-related risk and bringing operational efficiencies to our clients. In summary, you're in safe hands working with Concord and Arctic Wolf. Following Michael's presentation, we will be coordinating a Q&A, so we should have plenty of time for questions, so please get engaged. And today's session will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel over the coming days. So I'm going to hand over to Michael now. He's the guy that you're all here to see. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And good morning, everybody. And first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to attend this session. Hopefully, it's going to be useful. We're going to go through the cyber threats unpacked session. So we're basically going to look at what our incident response data really tells us when we look back at 2025 and the engagements that we've had from a incident response perspective. So just by means of a quick introduction, so my name is Michael Armstrong. I'm one of the senior sales engineers here at Arctic Wolf, relatively new to Arctic Wolf, been here about eight or 9 months. But prior to that, I've worked in technical pre-sales and various solution architect roles at both VMware and Microsoft, with a big focus on networking and security. And actually before that, I used to be an end user. So I used to be basically a customer, various roles there, systems administrator, systems architect. And I've actually been in your shoes, like, do you know what I mean? I've done your roles previously. And the interesting thing is being on this side of the fence now is, to be honest, nothing has really much changed. Like patching is still an issue. Remote management tools and managing your environment is still an issue that customers are facing now. So, you know, nothing really has changed since I've done it, but hopefully we're getting better when it comes to security. So the plan is we're going to talk about the threat landscape in 2025. And actually, there will be a good takeaway with regards to our threat report that was released in February. And once again, as part of the follow-up, we can provide links to download that threat report. But then we're also going to talk about some of the predictions in 2026. Okay, so Arctic Wolf has an internal labs team that look at all of the threats and all of the data that we've seen, and they make predictions based on the data that they've seen. So I'll go through some of the top predictions for 2026. And then more importantly, how Arctic Wolf can help customers. And this is more around how can we help you be more secure in an ever-changing landscape. Like, threat actors are getting more and more sophisticated. The technologies being used are more and more advanced. So how can really Arctic Wolf help you guys in this situation? And then finally, there'll be some key takeaways. And as I said, we'll leave it open. There will be time for questions. I'll try not to look at the Q&A as we're going through, just because it sort of throws off the discussion. But as I said, we'll make sure we've got time at the end. So all of this data is gathered via our threat report. And there's a QR code there, but once again, we'll make sure you get access to the links to register for this. And this is actually the 4th year that we've published a threat report. We're extremely proud because there's a lot of time and effort goes into gathering this information, and more importantly, really understanding the data. We're not just focusing on some of the key highlights of the report, but a lot more additional information is actually in that report. So as I said, it's worth going through, downloading, and really digesting all of that. And by drawing up on the first-hand experience that our Arctic Wolf security experts, this report really highlights a lot of the key attacks that we're seeing. We start to uncover a lot of the tactics, the techniques and procedures that these threat actors are using in their attacks, and also, what organizations can do in order to prevent and, more importantly, detect and respond to any future incidents of this type. And as I mentioned as well, we also highlight 12 recommendations for 2026. And this is really designed to help organizations reduce risk. Yeah, we never say we're going to 100% get rid of that risk entirely. It's more about reducing risk and putting barriers and friction in place, while also retaining the ability to adapt, because obviously things are changing. It's an ever-changing landscape. So the insights and the data that I'm going to go through today, this is drawn upon hundreds of digital forensics and incident response. It's often known as DFIR engagements that our Arctic Wolf incident response team run. This spans, multiple countries, and it's typically done, or the report is typically based off a 12-month period. Okay, so for this report particular, this was from November the 1st, 2024 through to November the 1st, 2025. The key thing here as well is we also do incident response for organizations of varying sizes and different verticals. So we get a good indication of the types of attacks and the unique data points that are applying to specific organizations, whether they're SMB or enterprise, but also based on the verticals. So things like manufacturing and retail. And when you start looking at incident response data at scale, you start seeing patterns that emerge that typically don't show up on the day-to-day operations. And in this case as well, we typically focus on incident response worthy incidents where the attacks have broke containment, they've maybe bypassed some security controls that organizations have in place, and they're basically forcing organizations into making these high-stake decisions. And this really gives us that unique view on how adversaries are actually succeeding. Like, how are they breaking containment? How are they getting past? This isn't theory. This is what our incident responders do on a day-to-day basis. And then we also augment this with telemetry that we get from our platform. So information that we're seeing from existing customers that gets ingested into our platform. We also have our threat intelligence team. We've got the digital forensic experts and incident responders. We've also got professional ransomware negotiators. So this report is built up from a variety of specialists in this industry that are really, really helping customers understand how these attacks are happening, and once again, more importantly, how to look at preventing these attacks. So let's take a look at the top 6 cyber incidents. And this is, as I said, this is from 2025, so from November 24 to November 25. And I guess if there's one thing from this report that you should probably take away, it's that 3 attack types, okay, so ransomware, BEC, which is business email compromise, and data theft account for 92% of the real-world incidents that have triggered a full incident response engagement. That's massive. 92% are from 3 types of attacks. So if you're going to look at reducing your attack surface, these are the sort of things that you want to start looking at. Like, how can you prevent ransomware? How can you prevent business email compromise and data incidents? And this concentration, it's actually quite important because it tells us that attackers, they don't need a novelty way to win. They just need one weak identity. Okay, so some identity that's maybe not protected with multi-factor authentication, or maybe one exposed remote access service, or one successful phish, and then they've got access. And now we're also seeing pre-ransomware cases grow. So you'll see there's a new category there of 5% for pre-ransomware. And this has grown because actually we're getting better at detecting. Okay, so we're actually getting better at detecting intrusions and preventing that ransomware from being detonated. Okay, so this is a good thing, the fact that we're seeing pre-ransomware cases, but actually it also means that that attackers are starting to adapt their craft. So in that ransomware category, it's not just ransomware. It typically involves things like data exfiltration, because at that point, attackers can do double extortion. Okay, so if they've deployed ransomware which has encrypted all of your files, but actually they've exfiltrated that data first, then they can try and extort you in order to release that, in order to de-encrypt all of those files. But then more importantly, they can also try and request another ransomware payment in order to not disclose the information that they've stolen. Okay, so we're actually seeing double extortion attempts. Business email compromise. So this is email systems being compromised and potentially a malicious threat actor inserting themselves into conversations. And then data incidents. This is typically a catch-all term which involves things like data loss, data theft. This is potentially where customers also need support in identifying how it's happened and potentially what data has been exfiltrated and where it's been exfiltrated to. And once again, in our previous threat report, pre-ransomware incidents were very, very rare, that they actually didn't even warrant their own category. But yeah, once again, we're now starting to see that creep up, and in 2026, we're probably going to see more pre-ransomware as well. So this year-on-year change, it's likely driven by a combination of a few things. So as I said, we've now got improved detection capabilities, like organizations have, like EDR or endpoint detection response software. They're acting based on that. Where we have tooling and mechanisms in place to prevent ransomware from being detonated, and also timely and effective responses. So because we have the ability to respond more effectively, that's where we're seeing this pre-ransomware case happening. We're being able to kick out the attackers before they actually do any harm. So as I said, despite improved detection, we are getting a lot better at it. There's been a lot of major law enforcement takedowns as well. So law enforcement is actively aware of these ransomware groups that are involved in. But as I said, it still remains the number 1 catalyst for incident response engagements that Arctic Wolf IR team are working with customers on. It's not staying dormant; it is active. There's a huge ecosystem underneath ransomware that's changing. Okay? You've got various affiliates competing with each other. There's new groups emerging. And there's some of the actors that they're starting to prioritize speed and stealth over encryption. And by that, I mean, they're trying to get in and once again, doing this data exfiltration because the encryption side of things could take time. So they just want to get that data out. Interestingly, I attended a session a while ago around quantum computing. And what they were saying there was, even if the data is still encrypted, threat actors are still trying to exfiltrate that data, knowing that further down the line, when quantum computing becomes a lot easier to do, they will potentially have the ability to decrypt that data and then once again start trying to do the extortion and trying to request for ransom payments. So a lot of them are irrelevant of whether it's already encrypted. They're still going to take that data and try and get access to it further down the line. Yeah, so I said last year we were at 44%. This year we're at 44%. And detection capabilities is key here. Right? Being able to identify where somebody is in the organization, if they're trying to move laterally inside that organization, being able to detect that and basically contain them or kick them out before they start detonating any of this ransomware. And let's be honest, I mean, ransomware is a lucrative business. As I said, we're starting to see these threat actors refine their craft. They're starting to change some of the tactics and techniques that they're using. Key here is trying to detect them as early as possible. So the fact that ransomware is still holding at 40%, it can sort of trick you into thinking that ransomware is steady. Once again, last year was 44%, this year was 44%. But as I said, like underneath that, the ecosystem is moving pretty fast. I like to think of it as an iceberg. You sort of see the iceberg at the very top, but actually underneath it, there's probably a bigger density surface at that point. Like what is going on underneath that? It's getting bigger and bigger. Some groups, as I said, some groups are abandoning encryption completely. They're literally just trying to get that data out as quickly as possible, and then once again negotiating with you at that point whether to publicly release it or whether to accept the ransom and basically just leave it as is. We're also starting to see that attackers, that they're starting to experiment with like lower friction, higher return models, so easier ways to get into organizations. So retail is key around this. Right? A lot of retail points of service, like getting access into these and being able to get data that is of a high value return. And there's also, more scarily, that threat actors are starting to expand beyond the digital world, and they're trying to increase their effectiveness with violent in-person crime. And this can start with things as harassing phone calls, potentially harassing people in the street, damage to assets and buildings, and smashing windows and things like that. So we're starting to see the digital world moving more into the physical world, and people being forced to pay ransoms because there is a risk to either assets or to themselves. And I think that, to me, is the scary point. I think everything was, it's horrendous going through a ransomware event or some sort of ransom request. But actually, if you feel like your life is at risk, or once again your assets or family or things like that, I think that's where things start getting a lot more scarier than what they previously were. So I think the motivation is clear here. It's money. Okay, so when you map these IR cases based by industry, this is where you start seeing more of a pattern. And I mean, let's be honest, attackers are, they're gravitating to sectors where downtime is expensive and sensitive data is plentiful. Okay, that's what they want. They want to try and cause as much confusion and issues as possible, because then at that point there's a better chance that you're going to pay that ransomware. So we're starting to see things like manufacturing, legal, education's big. We're seeing a lot in education, and also finance, and that's primarily because the operational and reputational impact, and also the downtime. Right, downtime on manufacturing can be very, very high. And the same goes for business email compromise. Right? Attackers are going where the money is, and that's typically things like finance and insurance and legal. And interesting as well, from a manufacturing perspective, every hour they are down, it's costing them money. Okay, so it doesn't take long for people to start thinking, well, actually, if I'm down for, I don't know, 48 hours, and it's £1 million an hour, am I better off paying the ransom in order to get my services back up and running? You start thinking that, because the sort of logic plays up. And then you've also got healthcare. It's not just financial loss. Like, we're starting to see healthcare organizations being attacked. I think the real pivotal moment was obviously WannaCry back in 2017 or 2018. I think that was a big pivotal moment in cybersecurity where people actually started realizing, hang on, right? An attack like this can start affecting lives. I think one thing to take away from this slide is that all businesses are impacted. Okay, some more than others. Yeah, obviously where there is a clear financial gain, or as I said, sensitive data, they're most likely to be impacted more than others. But actually, every sector is being impacted. And threat actors, they're opportunists. They're just looking for the easy wins, and they want to go where the money is. So I guess looking ahead, the consistent dominance of things like ransomware and business email compromise, it just demonstrates that these threat actors, they're motivated by money. That is what it's all about. And if you look at, I think it was the FBI, they released a report. I think it was May or April last year, and this was showing that for business email compromise specifically, like the losses in 2024 were around 2.7 billion. That is a lot. And that's why, things like finance and legal are big sectors for business email compromise. So ransomware 26 by the numbers. So for the first time in our threat report over the last 4 years, the median ransomware demands have dropped. Okay, so in 2024 it was around 600k. In 2025 that's actually dropped to 414k. That might sound like good news, but actually what the ransomware negotiators are seeing is it's actually strategic pricing. The example that I typically give here is if you go into a car dealership and you've got, let's say, a budget of 30,000, if he comes out and says, right, this car is going to be 90,000, instantly you're just going to dismiss it straight away. But if you came across and said, this car's 35,000, you think, actually, yeah, I can maybe afford that, or maybe with a bit of negotiating, we could potentially get that down. That's what these threat actors are doing. They realize that if they come in with this huge demand, that instantly you're just going to go, no chance, we cannot afford that. But actually lower demands, it increases the odds of payout because, once again, back to manufacturing, if you're down for 48 hours and it's £1 million per hour, at some point you think, I'm going to be better off paying this ransomware within 24 hours, otherwise I'm worse off. And also we're seeing a lot of competition between various threat actor groups as well. Okay, so there's a lot of competition between them. So if one is, 2x the price of another, then, people aren't going to pay. So they're starting to keep their prices very, very similar. And more importantly as well, like the barrier to entry is very, very low. Like there are services out there that will offer ransomware as a service. There are sites out there where you can buy credentials, elevated credentials. Anybody can do this sort of thing nowadays, especially with the invention of AI and being able to use that to start crafting some attacks. So this is ransomware evolving. We don't think it's weakening. It's evolving more from an economics perspective. And the Arctic Wolf incident response team, I mean, these guys are experts in negotiating tactics. Like they do this on a day in, day out basis, and they are very, very good at lowering that payment if the organizations decide to pay. In our case, 302 million was demanded, but actually only 16 million was paid, which is a huge reduction. And the recommendation is always going to be, don't pay. You're just encouraging this to keep going. Unless obviously there's certain circumstances, customers potentially will always pay. But you also need to think about the legal ramifications around potentially paying as well, because if paying that ransom is tied back to funding terrorism, then obviously there could be legal ramifications on the organization if they decide to do that. So just a quick show of the ransom demands by industry, because I think if you look at the average, it doesn't really show us much. I think you need to drill down and focus it based on actually on the industry, because the average doesn't really show us the actual true cost. But if you see here, construction dropped a little bit, finance dropped a little bit, healthcare stagnant, legal and governments dropped quite a bit, but retail is huge. Retail has potentially doubled from 2024. And we've seen this in the press with things like the Marks and Spencer's breach. You've got Harrods, you've got Co-op, right? They're targeting retail organizations because they know that downtime could have significant consequences. So expert negotiation does pay off. So when the team who created the report, basically they were speaking to the incident responders and the investigators and the people who do the threat actor negotiations, and they basically came up with this quote. So strong backups empower you to reject ransom demands because resilience beats extortion. So even insurers are urging companies not to pay, proving that preparation is the smartest path to recovery. And this has helped 70% of clients refuse ransoms entirely. So when organizations have strong backups, those backups are immutable, so they cannot be modified once they have been written, and they've got a solid incident response partner, they can gain that decision advantage. Okay, and that's 77%. It's a big number. So really, what you want is you want to ensure that you can recover in the event. But also you have a strong incident response plan, right? Test the plans, ensure the plans are stored off-site, all of the best practices around incident response. And I think it's interesting as well here, the incident response investigators, they get to know these ransomware groups. They typically negotiate with the same people based on whatever type of ransomware is being deployed. So they sort of know what they can get away with and how much they'll discount and things like that. They build up a rapport with these ransomware groups and these individuals that work as part of these groups. So root point of compromise. This is the one that I always find very, very interesting. So how did the attackers actually get in? So this is where, and once again, I can talk about this. I've been here, I've done this. This is where the operational reality really starts to show up. Okay, so the vast majority of non-business email compromised intrusions start with very, very simple remote access abuse. Okay, this is things like RDP, remote desktop protocol, VPN services, remote monitoring and management tooling. This isn't zero-day vulnerabilities or anything like that, nothing exotic like that. It's effectively just attackers logging in. Okay, there's that many different remote management tools and tools for gaining access to your end users' laptops as part of an operational and support perspective. We see a lot of time with test and development. These environments typically aren't under the same level of security as the production environment. So developers typically install their own remote access tools. And if they're exposed externally and there is some vulnerability there or the authentication isn't as secure as it needs to be, then it's a simple way for these attackers to log in. And as I said, a lot of these are probably tools that you're already using. Most of you will have some sort of remote management tool. You will have some sort of remote access, whether it's VPN or RDP and things like that. And this is how they're getting in. External exploits dropped 11%. As I said, this isn't zero day. This is just misconfigurations. We see a lot of this with cloud environments where initially maybe they weren't following best practices and things like storage accounts getting exposed and stuff like that. And then social engineering and phishing, that's made up of 7%. And this is attackers using very, very low level techniques. Domain names that look very similar with a slight bit of a spelling. They can do target phishing attempts where they're focusing on a specific user, and they can gather that information relatively easy. Business email compromise, as I said, this is the second most common threat, and I think for the third consecutive year. and this typically accounts for 26% of the cases that we've seen. I think business email compromise is still a bit misunderstood. It's generally not about the mailbox. It's about what that access actually enables. Things like financial fraud, data theft, shipping scams. So basically inserting yourself into an email conversation and arranging for various products to be shipped to a different address. And these are more operational attacks. You know, it's not just phishing emails. And I think obviously with the invention of AI and how that's coming along leaps and bounds, like as I said, you can create more efficient impersonations. You can target specific people, i.e. the CEO, the CTO, people like that. And I think it's just going to get more and more accurate and effective. As I said, with the invention of a lot of the AI technologies that we've got, it's just going to become more and more effective. It's getting harder and harder to spot it, let's put it that way. You know, hopefully you all do phishing simulations and you'll see that actually a lot of them are getting more and more advanced. So from a regional perspective, what are we actually seeing in EMEA? So within EMEA, we're seeing a clear move towards data theft only attacks. So this is, as I said, somebody gaining initial access and then starting to exfiltrate that data out rather than deploying any ransomware, because they generally know that that part might take a bit of time. So once again, early detection and response is key at this point. We're also seeing them target organizations, typically smaller SMB organizations, but also they are pressurizing them to pay because of things like GDPR fines and disclosure requirements. And once again, if the ransomware demand is less than some of the fines that they're going to be potentially liable for, is it easier to just pay the fine and then just sort of forget about it? Yeah, I guess that's a business decision, but they're putting a lot of pressure on their victims to pay. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but there's a really good website called ransomware.live, which basically shows all of the known ransomware or breaches that have occurred worldwide, but you can actually filter it based on the UK. I check that site a couple of times a week just to see if there's any, what sort of organizations are being breached, and it is a variety of sectors and a variety of organization sizes as well. So nobody is immune to it, in my opinion. Right, so with that, what are some of the 2026 predictions? So prediction number one, so information warfare will reach new heights. So we basically expect to see a sharp rise in things like misinformation, disinformation, things like malicious campaigns attempting to influence things like world politics, or generally just sow discontent and try and drive wedges between all of the population groups. I don't think this is new. We've seen this certainly a lot of time around things like elections and stuff like that. Prediction two, so attackers are going to take, they'll make use of the surrounding global events, once again, things like elections, but actually more importantly, sporting events. So we've obviously had the Winter Olympics. There was a big uptake in threats during, or threat campaigns during the Winter Olympics. We've obviously got the World Cup coming up again. And this is simple things like, crafting social engineering lures, so trying to get people to click on sort of malicious streaming websites where they can see, the World Cup live, things like that. We'll start seeing an increase in those type of threats. Ransomware is still going to be the most significant threat. We don't see any reason why this will change in the short term. We potentially do expect longer negotiation cycles, potentially larger initial ransomware demands, but we're going to see more public shaming. Okay, so this is threat groups shaming organizations, saying that they've been breached and we've got this data. We'll see an increase in that continuing to happen. Social engineering will increase, and this is going to use things like real-time voice manipulation and video manipulation, so also known as phishing attacks. People trying to masquerade as executives and things like that. We've also seen this internally with interviews. So people who are interviewing for roles, we now mandate that you have to have your camera on. And also we have training in order to try and identify if people are using deep fakes as part of this interview process. So this is live. This is happening now. And then we're going to see the continued use of AI. Okay, that is going to continue. These attacks are going to get more and more sophisticated. They're going to get more and more malicious. Once again, creating convincing phishing emails, deep fakes, automated vulnerability research, things like that. AI is going to be key going forward, even more so as it's being used now. And I just wanted to share this. So I was looking on LinkedIn once, and I seen a post from a gentleman called Andy Schneider, and I've linked to the post there just to give him credit for this. But he was using some free open source tool called Artemis. It was by Stanford Trinity. And this is basically an automated red team engine. So the idea is that it can do like vulnerability analysis and things like that. And he actually deployed it. He deployed it in an environment. He was testing it against a well-known virtual machine that was used for vulnerability analysis and things like that. He was using an outdated GPT-5 model with a whole bunch of like sub-agents that they classed as swarm. And he was able to, or this tool was able to get full root access of this virtual machine in just 74 minutes. It done brute force dictionary attacks to get login, and that took around 4 minutes. And it basically completed the full task in about 1 hour, 40 minutes, which was the whole 74 minutes. But actually it went beyond what it was supposed to do. And actually it started doing auditing and identifying where there were certain security ciphers that were out of date and things like that. And it came back and fed this. And I thought this was just so informative. I couldn't believe it. But then when he explained the cost, so the cost for that 74 minutes was $1.75. For the full audit, it was $14. Okay, so just think of what AI can do if people have got access to these environments to be able to do this. It was very impressive. Right, so just a quick few slides on how Arctic Wolf can help. So Arctic Wolf, we are a global organization. We've got around 10, 11,000 customers globally. We ingest around 10 trillion events per week from our customers. And the reason that I sort of call out those numbers is from a customer base, if we see a new indicator of compromise for I don't know, customer A who is maybe in manufacturing in the US, any detections that we put in place for that new indicator of compromise, or even that indicator of compromise, the rest of the customer base benefits from. Okay, so we talk about what we class as the network effect. Once we have that indicator of compromise in our global SOC, all of the customers benefit from that, and we go back and retrospectively do threat hunting based on that indicator of compromise as well. The incident response, so we do around 1,000 incident response engagements per year. Now you're probably thinking, well, if I've got Arctic Wolf, why do I still need incident response? But actually those engagements, probably 98, 99% of those engagements come from organizations who don't have Arctic Wolf and are maybe being referred by their partner or by insurance organizations. Okay, so a lot of the incident response engagements that we do are non-Arctic Wolf customers. And our mission is very, very straightforward. We want to try and end cyber risk. Okay, will we get 100%? Probably not. Will we get you 90% there? Yes. Yeah, I would always be a bit wary of any organization that says they will 100% reduce cyber risk, because there's just so many novel ways of attackers are working now and things like that. I don't think we'll ever get to that point. But it's all about reducing that friction, increasing that friction and putting barriers in place. And we do that via a means of both technology and talent. Okay, so we have the technology to ingest all of this information and understand it, but then we also have the security engineers that back up that technology to be able to provide that human element. And as I said, it's all about understanding the levels of risk and doing that risk mitigation. So we ingest telemetry from a variety of sources. Obviously, the endpoint, network, we pull in security telemetry from all of the hyperscalers, as you would expect, identity, human, and then also specific applications as well. I guess a few things to take away from this slide is, first of all, we are vendor agnostic. So we don't mandate that you have to use a specific product. So you don't have to use our specific endpoint solution. If you're quite happy with your existing provider, then absolutely fine. We generally have a lot of integrations with a lot of these vendors. And also, we do not charge for ingestion. What we've seen previously is organizations are a bit reluctant to include all of their environment because there's worry about the cost. Because a lot of vendors will typically charge for ingestion rates per gigabyte or per terabyte or something like that. We take that off the table from day one. We don't charge for ingestion. So we want to be able to see all of the telemetry. So your production environments, your test environments, your development environments. We don't want any visibility gaps in the scope. We have a whole bunch of services that can be consumed as part of that, and I'll go on to that in the next slide. But more importantly, we have that human element. Okay, so we have that concierge experience. So it's a team of 3 engineers that are aligned to a customer, and their role is really to help from a proactive perspective in supporting that customer and building out that security resilience. We also have the reactive side of things, which is the 24/7 by 365 monitoring with our security operations center. I say reactive because a lot of the time they're reacting to the alerts, but actually they do a lot from a proactive perspective as well with regards to threat hunting and going through existing data to see if there have been any new indicators of compromise that have been released that a customer potentially could be impacted from. So yes, the solutions that we offer, we do endpoint security. So if you as a customer is looking to replace your existing endpoint solution, then we have an offering around that. As I said, we don't typically mandate it, but we can do managed EDR, or you can manage the environment yourself. A lot of customers know us for our managed and detection and response capabilities. As I said, this is the 24/7 monitoring. We also have active response capabilities whereby we can take action on behalf of the customer. It could be something as simple as disabling a user account, disconnecting any active sessions, or containing an endpoint, or adding a URL into a firewall deny list. And that's all backed up with our threat intelligence. And as I mentioned, the unlimited log ingestion. We also have managed risk, which is all around securing the security, or helping with the security posture management. And you'll see a big push over the next year or so. We recently acquired an organization called Sebco, which is around assets attack surface management. So being able to pull in assets from a variety of services like CMDBs or cloud and have a single source of truth from an asset and attack surface perspective. So you'll see that solution come on quite a bit over the next 6 to 12 months. Managed security awareness training. So this is small micro-sized learning training videos, as well as things like phishing simulations. And then also we have incident response capabilities. So this is having an incident response team on retainer should you need it. And once again, you've seen the sort of level that these guys go into over the course of this presentation. They really are experts in the field, and they're all in-house. So we don't subcontract that out to any third party or anything like that. And really what we're looking to do is we're just looking to remove all of that noise, okay, and find or help you find that true signal that is that true positive. And we always talk about trying to find a needle in a haystack, but actually with a lot of the alerts that you're probably getting, it's more like trying to find a needle in a pile of needles. Okay, like how do you differentiate between what is a false positive versus what is a true positive? Okay, so what we do is we take all of these observations, we triage them, we ticket them, we do security investigations. If they're false positive, i.e. it's nothing to worry about, then we don't alert you. You can still see what we're working on, but we won't alert you. If it's a true positive, then we will take action based on what we have agreed with you. And then second to last slide, as I said, really what we're looking at doing here is just adding as much friction to the attacker as we possibly can. And this is why we say we can generally reduce that that risk down by 90%. Okay, so if you start doing assessments, so you understand where you are based on specific frameworks like Cyber Essentials, then you know your starting point. If you are enabling your users, you're doing security awareness training, you're identifying vulnerabilities and patching them, then that's from a proactive side of things. If you've got good endpoint security, and once again you have a managed solution around that, you're doing things like detection and response, you've got incident response should the worst case happen, that's the reactive side. And then from an Arctic Wolf perspective, any additional risk we can generally offset with a warranty, because we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is with regards to our service. And with that, just a few final key takeaways. As I said, 92% of all incident response cases are from 3 known threats: ransomware, business email compromise, and data exfiltration. Improved defense and response strategies have resulted in decreased ransomware. So being able to identify early and remove attackers or get them out of the environment, that is what's really decreasing that ability for that ransomware to be detonated. Attackers are finding tools in existing tools that we're using. Just make sure they're locked down. Use things like MFA wherever possible. Ensure all of your tools are up to date. Don't have multiple tools. Try and keep your development and production environments all consistent from a security perspective. These are simple things that even I done 12 years ago, but customers are still not doing this nowadays. And just be wary around global events. So when the World Cup starts, maybe just send out an email to all of your customers saying, look, World Cup starting, just be a bit extra vigilant on any emails that you get that's maybe referring to that, or click here to see the latest scores or anything like that. Just do a bit more user awareness training around certain events like that. And with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions. I'm 2 minutes over, so I apologize.
It's all right. I think, Michael, before you get onto that, I think I'm still on that $14. Wow, the level of impact on there is phenomenal. It certainly demonstrates that AI is a bit of a double-edged sword. We're seeing the use of AI, ML in our day-to-day practices, but purely from the basis to help reduce risk. But that said, cyber criminals are leveraging AI to make these attacks more sophisticated. I think also as well on the other side of it as well, the amount of levers that these guys are pulling, whether that be regulatory requirements, throwing GDPR in people's faces, fines, and even lowering the ransoms to it feels like it's all geared up to maximize the monetary return that they get from these engagements. So it's pretty scary stuff. I think probably as well on one of the things that you said today that sort of hit with me as well, and it's testament to what we do here at Concord, the resilience beats extortion quote. I really like that, because I can say with high confidence that we've always advocated the value in preparation. So anybody who's on the call or speaking with people from the customer relationship team talking about Guardian services, Sentry, Mirrorvault, or Overwatch, they'll definitely be well aware that we're operating within these spaces to help mobilize our clients to be best prepared. And as I said, we certainly advocate that. But I can see that there's some stuff running through the Q&A now, so let's use the time that we've got to cover that off. Go on, Hannah, you're in charge.
Look, so we've got one question, which is, what would you say the difference is between Arctic Wolf and other MDR solutions? We have Sophos MDR at the moment, and it works really well.
Yeah, good question. So I guess from an Arctic Wolf perspective, some of the key takeaways, as I mentioned, is the unlimited ingestion, but also the level of integration. So if a customer is already happy with their Sophos deployment, we can still ingest the security telemetry from Sophos. if they are potentially looking at replacing that with another vendor, we see Microsoft quite a bit due to the nature of the commercial agreements that customers have in place with Microsoft, and typically things like Defender is included as part of that. Then once again, we can pull all of that information in as well. Also, more importantly, things like active response. So we have integrations with a lot of third parties, whether it's the endpoint, whether it's things like identity, whether it is things like firewalling, to be able to take action on behalf of that customer. And the example that I always give is, maybe 9 to 5, the escalation path that you have with our security operations team is they will ring you depending on the severity, or they might email you. But actually, out of hours, you want us to take containment action. So if we see a malicious threat actor in one of your endpoints, we're getting that security telemetry, we can take that active response. We can actually do that. So I guess back to the Sophos side of things, depending on whether it's managed Sophos or not, but also, as I said, the level of integrations that we have with all of the third-party vendor ecosystem out there is key from an Arctic Wolf perspective.
I can also add to that as well, Michael. We've historically, when we've been developing these solutions or employing Overwatch as part of our wider stack, we've also as well integrated ourselves into the operational flows where needed. So if we were talking about something that appeared, in email security or endpoint security, we would act as that resolving area on behalf of our customers. It depends how integrated they are into our operational pillars, or if they're in a co-managed state. But as part and parcel of deploying Overwatch, which is powered by Arctic Wolf, we would typically see ourselves as a resolving area where needed. And again, that could ideally not, also as well the integration of third-party IT resellers or service providers as part of that process too. Got any more questions?
One question, didn't we? Oh, I must have explained everything so well.
Yeah, that's it for questions at the minute.
Yeah, I think we just sort of touched the surface on that threat report. So yeah, Hannah, I mean, I don't know if you typically follow up. You can maybe include the URL and things like that. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting read.
We will, Michael, will be, as part and parcel of our follow-up for this, we will be sending out, some survey forms. We welcome your feedback. We're doing a lot of these webinars. We only launched them this year. I think it's about a third, fourth one for the year.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and again, we've had some positive comments off the back of it, but equally as well, we've had areas where we can look for signs of improvement. So we'd welcome feedback from that. What I would say as well is to please keep an eye out for further webinars over the coming months. If you're looking to learn more about risk reduction strategies, or Arctic Wolf as a partner and the relationship that we have, please book an appointment with our customer relationship team. We'll guide you, through the various structural aspects of the services that we offer, and hopefully, you can leave those meetings feeling, more confident in your approach to reducing risk. So if we've not got any more questions, I can leave you all to your days. We'll close the webinar. And finally, Michael, thank you for your time today, delivering this presentation. That was fantastic. And for everybody who's joined the webinar, we really, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to support this. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks all.